Okay, I think we're live. Hi, Alda. Welcome to Venture with Grace today.
Thanks for having me, Grace.
So to start with the show, I would love for the audience to get to know you a little bit more. So let's start with, I feel like you have such a amazing experience working at different venture funds, even for like picking venture funds to work with. I feel like you already win the game. You have worked with Founders Fund and then 137 Ventures and the most recently Initialized Capital and now your own fund, Hawktail VC. And let's start with like, I want to learn more about like how did you get into venture? How was your role at like, all these amazing funds kind of shape you into running your own fund?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Grace. I never started out intending to go into venture. In fact, I didn't know venture existed when I grew up in my small town in Texas. But moving to California in high school really showed me the power of technology. I grew up went to high school in Cupertino, which is the seat of Apple. And all around me were friends whose parents worked at Silicon Graphics or Oracle or various just really, brand name technology companies. And I saw the power of these companies to sort of transform the world that we live in. And it was very inspirational. That being said, I couldn't let go of my childhood dream of being a lawyer. I wanted to be a lawyer because I saw how many people were being controlled by the system of government around us. And I thought to empower myself as an immigrant child, I myself should be able to understand the system and also be able to work within it and control it for, hopefully things that were beneficial to the world and beneficial to my family. And so that's really why I wanted to be a lawyer ever since I was very little. And so I followed that dream. And it wasn't until I was the lawyer for Founders Fund as their general counsel that I realized that I thought that I could actually have a more powerful role and change the future even more effectively by investing in great founders and investing in technology that would solve real problems. And so that
I
was sort of how I fell into venture.
Amazing. So I wonder, so I know that you mentioned it about this in like another podcast that like one of the lessons that you've learned from Peter Thiel was a lot of his decision was like really gut driven. And I wonder like I would love to unpack that a little bit. Like, I feel like someone like Peter, obviously he have bet on really amazing companies in the past. So I think trusting his gut, like it's like based on, his confidence in himself at like picking these amazing companies. And I wonder, like, is there some sort of science to it on like, how you should not like over indexing on the diligence process, but also like kind of create like basically following your instinct on like what would work or not. I guess like how do you kind of like shape your thinking to be at a point that you could just like quickly make gut decisions?
Well, I've seen all sides of the spectrum. So Peter, while being what Gary Tan likes to call a high agency investor,
Mhm.
which I think is sort of what you're referring to in terms of this sort of gut feel pattern recognition. I've also worked with I worked with at Initialized, and to have him to thank for bringing me to Initialized, Eric Warshing, who was my colleague at Clarium Capital, Peter Thiel's hedge fund. And he actually tried to go out and create sort of a rubric around what is an initialized company. And so we interviewed everyone at Initialized, he interviewed other investors, and he actually came up with this rubric. And at Initialized, we actually voted on each company sort of, it wasn't so quantitative, but there were four vectors that we looked at.
Mm.
One was the founder, and obviously that's the most important aspect as an early stage investor. The second was the market, sort of what market are they tackling? What is the market potential for this company? The last vector was the deal, which is, are we overpaying? Are we able to return the fund with the
Mhm.
ownership that we're getting at the price that we're getting? What are public market comps for these types of companies, if they exist? And lastly, there was a vote, which was really the only pervasive vote on the overall up, down, yes, no on the company.
Mm.
That was the one that carried the day, but we were sort of thinking about these other vectors in terms of looking at the company. And what I found was that even though we're thinking about these other areas, at the end of the day, it really did come down to your gut feel on whether or not you felt like these were founders that you could work with day in and day out who were working on a problem that had the potential to be big. And because there were so many pivots that happen with any portfolio company, and any company in general, it's hard to really index too much. Oh, actually, I forgot about one vector. It was a product. So there were four vectors on product and then the overall vote. It's really hard to over-index on what they were selling you at that particular early pitch. And at the end of the day, most of it came down to sort of your feel on the founders and whether there were people that were going to be able to figure it out and execute through any problem.
Totally. I wonder when it comes to building your own venture fund, since you have worked at like some iconic companies and iconic funds, and what are some core lessons that you feel like you took to build your own fund?
Absolutely. I learned so much from these amazing venture funds that I've been at. And I would say that my approach to thinking about what fund to join was based on sort of a similar analysis that I think LPs do, right? Like, is this a place that I think is going to outperform? And for me, it was very important to join a place where I felt like I could learn a lot, that had great access to deals, and were really good pickers. And I think when it comes down to thinking about venture funds from an LP angle, what you're really thinking about is whether or not they have a network and hustle. And I think, that's sort of a common mantra about what might distinguish a good GP and a good VC and someone you might want to invest in is like, comes down to basically, do they have network and hustle? And so I always wanted to join places that I felt like had unique networks, and that the managing partners and the VCs in charge were still hungry, wanted to succeed, wanted to go and pound the pavement, work for their founders, and find just really amazing companies that could have outperforming outcomes.
Totally. I wonder when it comes to picking your own um, thesis to investing. I know that you look at consumer tech companies, and I wonder how do you like kind of define your own thesis? Since like I feel like the funds that you've worked at in the past, they kind of have like different. It's like more on the generalist side. I feel like there's like for Initialized, there is Instacart, there's Coinbase. For Founders Fund, it's like so diverse set of like companies you guys invest in. And I wonder when it comes down to like picking your own thesis, how do you kind of like arrive at where you are at?
Well, I think that the truth about early stage and seed and pre-seed investing, as I mentioned, because there are so many changes that happen, founders leave, companies pivot, you really are looking at the founders. And so while at various points in times I've gravitated to different types of companies, at the end of the day, you really are evaluating that founder and whether or not you think they can stick through and find something within the sector that they've targeted that can really provide a service that people want to pay for. So absolutely, I think of myself as a generalist, and a little bit of a contrarian coming from sort of this Peter Thiel empire, because I want to find things in places that people are not looking necessarily, and I think that's where you can find value and opportunity. As far as my new fund, I think we have 3 partners, and some of them gravitate to different areas and have networks that are deeper in certain areas. And what I think is the through line is that we're all looking for amazing founders. And what I learned from Founders Fund is that you have to be open-minded and not be afraid of something that might seem a little bit crazy, as SpaceX did in 2008 when Founders Fund did that investment, and not necessarily be afraid of certain sectors that might have a hardware component or might have a scientific component about it. And so that's something we are bringing to Hawktail, is that open-mindedness about sectors that may be a little bit scary for people who are used to investing in enterprise SaaS, for example.
I want to double click on like, being um looking at deals that are like in the sectors that people may like overlook. I feel like that's a really bold approach because I feel like living in Silicon Valley, every deal is SaaS, or not every deal, but like I feel like there's a lot of like SaaS companies, and like nowadays AI is extremely popular. Before that, it was crypto, and I feel like people are very centric towards like these like mega trends or like the mega tech innovations. I think even for like, for looking at companies that are kind of like overlooked, I wonder what's your thought process on like picking the ones that are actually worth looking at, because some of them, like people would argue, people are not looking at it as because of like the valuation will never go up, or no one will invest in the later runs, or I think there's a lot of like traditional thinking to it, and I wonder how do you kind of like pick the if there's like any specific like lens that you are using to select the overlooked batch of people.
Well, I think it has to go back to that commonality of finding a fantastic founder who has the tenacity to continue to work on a problem. It is definitely true, Grace, that sometimes there's a little bit of, I would say, we have these stakeholders in venture, right? We have founders, we have LPs, we have other VCs, and those are the ones that we're talking to and working with day in and day out. And I would say that there's a little bit of a more of a late adopter mentality when it comes to the LP community, because, obviously their KPI is to be conservative with their endowments assets or their family offices assets. And so I do think that by the time that they're telling you that you should do something, it might be a little bit too late.
Mhm.
And so uh, I have a little bit of a, we should be following those founders. And when they're investing in something, that means that when they're spending their time on something, that's something that we should be thinking about really, really hard. And that was the same way that Initialized sort of found Coinbase, for example, was by following a founder who was working in enterprise SaaS, Brian
Mhm.
Armstrong, and he decided to quit his job at Airbnb and go and work on, Coinbase. And following that founder is sort of the way that Initialized found that company. And,
Mhm.
as far as the second point that you raised about, other venture capitalists won't invest in this. If it's working and it's creating value and solving a problem and generating revenue, the GPs, the VCs will follow, right? And I actually think we're quite fortunate right now to sit at a time where there's a proliferation and low barriers to entry to becoming venture capitalists.
Mhm.
All you have to have is sort of capital, right? It could be your own capital. It could be your uncle's capital. It could
Mhm.
be $50,000 that you are investing in early stage companies. $10,000 at a time, right? Or $50,000 at a time. You could start with $500,000. And so we have seen this sort of proliferation of solo GPs and GPs that are focused on very niche sectors and looking at all sorts of areas. So I think that while it is true that you do have to think about whether or not later stage investors will get there, that really shouldn't be the criteria, I think, sitting here today is at pre-seed and seed, because if the company gets traction, then the market will work itself out in terms of who wants to invest, right?
Mhm.
Because if it's working, everyone wants to follow.
Mm. I wonder, I totally agree on like if it's working, everyone will follow. I wonder when it comes to portfolio construction, how do you identify if a deal is, worth the worth it basically? So you mentioned like the like four benchmark that Initialize was using. One of them is like deal. I feel like at what valuation benchmark that you would consider a certain category of deal is like it's kind of working. And then also in terms of like portfolio construction, let's say if you're investing in X amount of company, are you a high like conviction investor, or like what would you be like the more towards like the indexy kind of approach? Of course, if
Well,
any of these is like not public, please like we could talk about something else.
no, no, no,
But
no. I mean, this is a question I've thought about a lot. And, I have a partner who was at SV Angel, which is obviously a much broader and more diversified portfolio. Also at seed and pre-seed, having spent time at Founders Fund, where it was very, very concentrated on the follow-on, and at Initialized, where part of our value add was that we were reserving capital behind those companies that we invested in for a rainy day. I've sort of been able to see a broad spectrum of companies, ones where there was very little reserves for follow-on, ones where there were lots of reserve for follow-ons, but very limited in terms of the number of companies they would follow on to, and one sort of in the middle. And so I've had a chance to think about what was the strategy that I thought was most successful. And, part of that comes from, continuing as a board partner Initialized, sort of understanding the Initialized ethos of working very closely with those companies, trying to add value, but also at the same time, having a front row seat to when they might be able to take off and be successful. And so I definitely believe in having follow-on. I understand how sometimes reserving too much for follow-on or reserving follow-ons for companies that might not be having as much success can bring your returns down, but I think it adds a lot of value to the portfolio company and helps win deals. My own personal philosophy is if you can sort of find that right balance, and I think that sort of the Founders Fund model would be the right balance that I would want to pursue of having follow-on, working closely with those companies, and then putting additional capital into the ones, very, very select few that are sort of having that inflection point and breaking out. So I definitely fall in the camp of having some reserves, but being very selective with those reserves.
I'm taking notes. I wonder when you're selecting the reserves, like obviously if we could see signal of like if a company is getting a lot of traction from, a lot of like, I don't know, tier one investors or whatever you say, it's like the right benchmark. I'm sure there's like some sort of signal that's like they are getting traction. However, I feel like based on my limited experience, I've seen my friends' company turn out to be huge success, but with like very fair amount of like, I guess like the like right traction at the very beginning. And then I've seen my friends company that are very popular among the investing space for the I don't know, like the very early stage, but later on like having struggled to raise the second round or like third round. I wonder how do you kind of pick the ones that you would actually do the follow on?
Sure. So maybe I could just double click a little bit on the first part of your statement. So you've seen your friends' companies that have great traction, but don't have VCs that want to invest. Is that
Oh, no,
right?
no, 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 no. I was saying like so a lot of so there's two camp of people. One camp of people it's like they look very hot on paper and like basically they're getting a lot of traction. However, their company went downhill. And then the other part is like some people's company just like may not like they seems like super normal or like just like not really like maybe they're not investing. Well, maybe they're not innovating in like the most like trendy sector or something. And then they just wasn't able to they were like struggling to raise the next round, but they eventually made it pretty big kind of things. So I wonder what are some like maybe metrics or like benchmark you're using to decide like which company to do the follow on.
Oh, for follow on. Sure. I mean, the lucky part of it is for follow on, you have the ability uh, to have seen how those companies have tracked over time. The harder part is making an initial investment decision where you may have spent maybe 3 hours with the founder, you may have
Mhm.
done a few reference calls. They may not have customers. So what you're looking at then is maybe their product sense or their domain expertise. You're validating that the problem exists and the customers want it. The follow-on, we have so much more information, right? And that's why
Mhm.
I I said that philosophically, I think that it makes sense to reserve for follow-on, but just be very selective with those companies because you have months and months of investor updates. You have months and months of like phone calls and Zoom meetings, and you're able to see the traction that the company is able to get. And so you can see if they're building product quickly, you can
Mhm.
see whether or not customers want to use that product, how engaged they are with the product. You can see their willingness to pay. You can see the
Mhm.
churn. So it is so much easier. But you're absolutely right, Grace. You can still be wrong because it's still early days. And while they may get a lot of traction with a niche part of the community, whether
Mhm.
it's consumer or SaaS or whatever sector that they're in, um, that could change,
Mhm.
right? There's still a million things that could go wrong where maybe if there's a hardware component, it doesn't work in the winter, or maybe customers will roll off once they've reached some certain life milestone, for example. So it's hard to know, and you certainly need to. You can't be right 100% of the time, or Series A investors would always be winning, but you certainly have a lot more information, and the key information that you have is really that exposure to the founder that you're getting over time, and
Mhm.
how they're responding to feedback, how they're responding to adversity. And I think that is certainly continues to be a key factor.
I wonder, how do you kind of like create conviction for yourself in a specific company? Maybe we could talk about like any portfolio company that you have like, from the minute that you encounter them, or like from the deal sourcing stage to, you know, uh researching the market, to like picking this company, to winning the deal, to maybe thinking about liquidation at one point. I wonder, how do you kind of like build conviction at a very early stage? I feel like there's only limited information goes into a company, and yeah, like how do you kind of arrive at like putting money into a company from meeting them?
Yeah, I wanna pick a company that I think is interesting because, I think that there are a whole host of companies that are good, that we've invested in, that have great founders, but may not be as interesting to your audience. And so
Mhm.
the company that I'm gonna pick is a company called Outer Bio. And, my partner, Michael Plansky, I worked with him at Founders Fund. He was an associate there. Uh he actually incubated this company, and it does skin research. And so, as someone who cares a lot about what I'm putting on my body, like what toothpaste I'm using, what lotion that I'm using, and what, especially for my children, I became a lot more conscious of all of this potential toxicity that we have around us. I read somewhere that an average woman puts something like 3,000 chemicals on her body every day. And so that's something that's been top of mind for me. And I spend all this time. Last night I was on this EWG website trying to find deodorant that was non-toxic and still effective. And
Mhm.
while we have regulation around toxicity, we don't have great ways to test products for whether or not they're effective, and whether or not they are good for yourselves and for your children and for whomever uses the product. And so right now, the pervasive way to test these things is on live humans or on animals. And it's striking to me that we haven't had any skincare innovation that has really been as scientifically effective as retinol, and that came out sort of 30, 40 years ago. So that is what this company is tackling, is research tools for products that we put on our bodies. And so what they've developed is real skin that is surgical waste. So it's a little bit gross, but they're taking the surgical waste from I don't know, like facelifts or tummy tucks, and they've developed a proprietary petri dish, and they've developed a proprietary compound to allow the skin to live for 6 to 8 weeks. And they're coupling that with their AI and machine learning models, and gathering 30,000 pieces of data on each piece of skin that they're testing. And so they have a laboratory, they're testing products on skin, they've run baseline samples on products like retinol, to determine how efficacious they are, and provide a whole new way to test products that doesn't currently exist.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I wonder, so basically, from the sourcing perspective, it was your partner and who incubated this product. That's like such a interesting way to like deal source, I guess. I wonder, like, how does he incubate a lot of product? This is one of them, or like is this
Well,
a
he started several companies since I've known him. I think he started almost 8 companies since I've known him. But it's actually not unique, because what we are trying to do as early stage investors is build relationships with founders who may leave and start their own companies. And so I would say that that's definitely one of the sourcing mechanisms that we employ, and that we employed at Initialized, we employed it at Founders Fund. At Founders Fund, we actually had a program called the Tech Fellows program, where we tried to identify the sort of number 2, number 3, like the head of product at larger companies that might leave to go start their own companies. And so we actually formed a whole fellowship program around it and awarded these future founders with an award. We gave them some capital that they could invest, hopefully in their own companies, and we tried to put them in the same room with people who had complementary skill sets, whether that was general management, engineering, product sense, so that they could start companies together. So I actually do think that it is a replicatable model. Maybe it's not your business partner that's doing it, but maybe it's someone that and that you've tried to stay close to, that you may have worked with before, or that worked at one of your prior portfolio companies that you're keeping in touch with. And so I definitely have a list of founders that I'm tracking that I know will go off and start another company or start a new company that I want to be close to, because I think they have a lot of potential. And, the team for Outer Bio was very experienced. They actually came from a company called Emulate that was building sort of this organ on a chip that Founders Fund had invested in. And the entire founding team of that company, from the chief scientific officer, the chief technical officer, the chief business officer of Outer, came from Emulate and had experience already building a similar type of product of organ on a chip. And, skin is our largest organ. And so they had experience in this domain as well.
Wow. So like, did Emulate have like a really good exit? That's why they're kind of like, oh, second time founders. Is this kind of the benchmark that you would like kind of like you're looking for, like that people already having existing track record?
No, I mean, I think we're very willing to best bet first time entrepreneurs. Emulate itself is still going. They raised a whole bunch of venture capital financing, got to their sort of growth stage right now, and the team there, some of them were founders and some of them were not, and so I think there are sort of first time founders in the bunch that spun out. I actually, to get to the core of your question, am not particularly, focused on, second or third time founders, although they can be great and they've learned a lot from their past companies, and certainly can avoid a lot of those landmines. I think Initialized invested in some great second and third time founders like Parker Conrad with Rippling, or Ryan from Flexport, who my partner Robert Pollack also invested in SV Angel. So certainly, second, third time founders are fantastic. What I have found is that they also command much higher valuations for their companies. And as we all learned during this market downturn, after a really strong market and high valuations during the beginning of COVID, is that you have to really think about sort of that potential exit multiple and whether or not the high price that you're paying for an early stage company is justified.
I wonder, I'm literally taking notes. I wonder, when it comes to like having like a system for sourcing, picking, and diligencing, and like liquidation, thinking about liquidation. Is there any like theme that you would like identify for that's kind of working for yourself in terms of sourcing? So why I'm asking is I feel like ventures are really relationship driven business. Like, I think as a person like yourself, you are very senior in the industry, but for some of the listeners, they may be younger, and then they may not have like a super robust network. Maybe they're domain expertise person, or like they're very network among the younger generation of the crowd. How should they kind of come up with like a thematic sourcing like way, kind of? So how do they like kind of pick their smart friends to like potentially invest in them, and how do they kind of like build up a network if they're younger?
Well, I actually think that younger investors have a huge advantage, right? For example, I have always said if I was, sort of a junior investor at a venture fund, what I might do is go and live in one of these hacker houses,
Hmm.
right? Can't really do that now
Hmm.
with three kids. Go and live in a hacker house, but they really have the advantage. Everyone wants that network, right? Everyone wants to know, younger engineers, younger product leads, people who will go off and start companies and, um, sort of have a fresh blood and fresh energy to do that. So I think it's a really great advantage to be able to be sort of in that ecosystem and be out there meeting people, whether they're your college classmates or your frat brothers and sorority sisters, or whether or not it's sort of the associate level at venture capital firms, or sort of the individual contributors at a bigger company who are going to spin off and do their own thing. Like that's a really, really valuable. And to be able to have access to that network is something that I think a lot of venture funds want. Um, so, in terms of being systematic about it, I think it's important to spend time with people, and you have to constantly be refreshing your network and maintaining relationships with people and asking them if they know folks who are starting companies, asking them their thoughts on particular problems that they might see from wherever they're working. And
Hmm.
another aspect that I think is important is to take a lot of pitch meetings,
Hmm.
right? I remember that when Brian Singman first joined Founders Fund, he took every single pitch meeting that came his way, and that is the way that you start to get that pattern recognition down. And those founders, even if you pass on their companies, hopefully will have, and this is up to you, a good experience, and that you give them good feedback, and that you're very thoughtful with how you ask questions, and hopefully they'll send you other companies that are interesting, or they'll come back to you when they're starting their next company, or they'll come back to you for their next round. And so saying yes to all of those meetings is really, really a powerful tool to expand your network and build your own brand and get your name out there.
Totally. I wonder, since you have invested in, or like at least like Initialized have invested in like, Coinbase or Instacart or like your past experience at Founders Fund, you guys have seen what is an exceptional founder, and like seeing them in pitch meetings. I feel like it's easier to encounter people who are super amazing entrepreneur at like a social level, especially as a younger person. Maybe you met them at a party or something, but it's hard to actually get a pitch from them, or like let them treat you seriously with like everything they're doing to a degree. And I wonder, when it comes to um I guess, like, since you have seen like what success looks like for these like a really successful company, how, as a younger person, how would you kind of like train yourself on um being able to get in front of like the really talented people and like kind of recognize what is good, what is great?
Yeah, I would say, and obviously it's hard to distill into one word. And I think, Ben Horowitz talks about grit, and, at Initialize, like we sort of talk about it as relentlessness. And I will say that the founders that I've seen really be successful have this burning hunger and anxiety and constant questioning about, how can I grow faster? How can I be better?
Mhm.
How can I do things better? And I would say for younger investors, they should also have that same hunger and determination. And I talked about hustle earlier, but I have seen that sort of really competitive, anxious, neurotic,
Mhm.
24/7 thought process. And I've had founders call me who were just like walking around, on the streets of Manhattan or the streets of Redwood City, and saying to themselves, like, how can I grow faster? How can I grow faster? What can I do more? What can I do? Right.
Mhm.
And that constant running monologue in your head, I think, is what distinguishes someone who, um, what is like a distinguishing characteristic that I found in the founders that you're talking about, right? Ones that care so deeply about their company and want their company to succeed so much that they sacrifice things that sometimes I encourage them not to sacrifice, like, are you eating? Are you exercising, right? Like, we can't have you burning out. But I do see this constant late night, all hours obsessiveness about what can I do more.
Mm. I wonder when it comes to, I feel like that's definitely something to look for, but I feel like there are a lot of people who also hustle really hard, but wasn't as achieving like humongous of success, because I feel like a lot of it were also, market and if they're at the right place, right time. Although like, there's a lot of founders, I feel like they achieve different level of success um in terms of like, returns. I wonder if there's any sort of particular theme that or like, I guess, like if there's like any benchmark you would judge a certain market is worth looking at, or a certain things that are, um, we talk about like overlooked. If there's any particular area that you are extremely excited about that you feel like is kind of like overlooked by a traditional like major amount of like venture folks.
Well, I think you're talking about, several things. One is absolutely there's a luck aspect involved,
Mhm,
right? And I can't solve for that because I think it's sort of an intangible. In terms of being sort of calculated around it, I wouldn't go with it from a top-down perspective, to be quite honest, Grace,
mhm,
because it's hard to be obsessive about something that you're not passionate about.
mhm,
And so I think it has to necessarily be sort of this bottoms up thing. And I've seen people who try to find a problem, they make a list of sectors that could be successful,
mhm,
and that's really hard because you can't find that passion about what you're working on. If you're like,
mhm,
"Oh, this particular problem is a really big problem with large market potential that people would pay for, but it's not something that you care about, and it's not something that you feel passionate about."
mhm,
It's very hard to get to that level of sort of obsessiveness about
mhm,
it. And so I'm sorry that this is a poor answer because um, being sort of being sort of top down about this question is certainly one way to think about it,
mhm,
right? Like, what's a big problem that I can tackle that
mhm.
would make me successful? But if your desire is just to be successful and not have a problem that you care about, it's hard to make it all work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I
So
think the more I think I was, because I feel like I have a lot of friends who are emerging managers, and a lot of our listeners are emerging GPLPs, and like as for a younger person, or for everybody, to not just younger person but like any emerging manager, when they write a deck, there is, what is your like, what are you planning on investing, right? Like, what
Mhm,
is your theme? And like, I feel like nowadays, like, because there's too many VC fund, and like everybody's um theme is kind of like a niche of a niche. Some people's niche is like, we only invest in MBAs, and some people's niche are like, we only invest in like VR and AR. So basically everyone has like a very unique um niche based on their past experience. Although a lot of people's like goals is to become a generalist, to do the, bottom up approach. However, like, people still, in the end of the day, to fundraise or to, close deals, they typically pick a thesis. I wonder if there is like a particular thesis that you would think it's like interesting to pick, or in general, like, do you think this is like a good approach, since like, right now, like, I feel like generalist fund is very hard for like the first generation like fund manager, or like, not first generation but like more like emerging people in general.
Well, I would preface it by saying a lot of my answer in terms of the sort of bottoms up approach, I was approaching it more from a founder perspective,
Mhm,
and so my point was that a founder should feel passionate and a personal affinity for the problem that
mhm,
they were working on to solve
mhm,
with their company. From a VC perspective, as far as, generalist versus domain specific firms, I think, obviously we've seen success for any of those. And you're absolutely right that from a VC perspective, having domain expertise can really be a value add and can provide a competitive advantage to finding a deal and seeing a deal early and selling yourself to a founder because your fund may be focused on that particular sector. So as far as, my fund is concerned, Hawktail, we certainly are also thinking about what sectors are going to be transformed by technology and that are large in the future. And so one of my partners is looking at sort of a whole host of facets around sort of this sort of climate side of things. And I wouldn't say that that's like carbon capture or necessarily technology around that, but sort of what types of software and hardware might exist, or fintech might exist around regulatory and global trends, whether that's sort of needing to finance electrification of homes or software to intelligently power buildings. That is the type of that is one of the sectors that we are thinking about that have a lot of tailwinds behind them. And honestly, there have been some government failures around. And so that's the right place for technology and software to step in and, solve real problems that are facing us and future generations. Another sector that we think has the same type of elements as sort of this healthcare and life sciences sector. And so I talked a lot about outer bio and how, our research tools are poor there. And it's not necessarily sort of things that require, 0 or 1 in terms of whether the science works or not, but problems that as we spend more of our time and our discretionary income, and as AI potentially, gives us more free time and solve some of the things that we might be doing on a day-to-day basis, I think people will be spending a lot of their money and energy thinking about their own health, thinking about their family's health, how to extend life, how to prevent aging, how to create, just a higher quality of life. And so, certainly those are things that software and technology and great founders can help improve.
Totally. I wonder when it comes to like thinking about running a fund that's a one-time fund versus like a franchise that, from fund 1 to fund 8 or something. I wonder what are things that you would think makes a good fund?
Well, I don't know if people admit that they're raising a one-time fund. Have you had people
Oh yeah. No, no, no.
sort of say,
No, I think it's
I'm
not
just
like a
gonna do one
choice.
shot and I'm out.
I don't think it's a choice. I think it's like people may not really have think things through, so they wouldn't be able to raise like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah.
But I would say like, what are things that you feel like since you have like worked at so many like iconic funds and like they have been able to, continue to like keep on raising and obviously they're doing a lot of things right. So I wonder like, for the folks like, I heard there's like statistic of like maybe half of the first fund doesn't turn into a fund two. So I wonder what are some kind of like things that you learn from these like great like fund organizations that they have like been doing right for them to have continuous success to actually building a fund, I don't know, 5, 6, 8 or something down the line.
Well, I mean, if I had to distill it into sort of one important thing, and this is, obviously it's just so obvious that I feel embarrassed to say it, but it's in, like picking great companies,
Of
right?
course, yeah.
But around that is all the things that people may not think about.
Mhm,
Um, and obviously picking great companies, helping them succeed, being a real value add on their cap table, being the type of person who can provide great advice that founders want to talk to and they want to bounce ideas off of. That's all great. And that's sort of the core of the business,
mhm,
right? But there's all these ancillary pieces that also go into making sure that you can continue to succeed as a firm. And I'm not talking about just sort of fund administration and having a back office. I'm also talking about, building brand for your firm. I'm talking about sort of building LP relationships
Mhm.
that go beyond the first fund, and maintaining those relationships, thinking about your pipeline of potential LPs for down the road, spending time on those relationships and making sure your existing limited partners know what you're doing and how you're working with your founders, and having them spend time with those founders, whether it's through an LP meeting or quarterly LP check-ins. I think that piece is really important, as well as sort of building that back office piece for making sure that you are providing professional services so that you can sort of continue to build the firm in the future. But I think that probably the most overlooked piece is sort of that limited partner piece of it, because obviously if you don't have capital, you cannot continue to raise additional funds.
Mhm.
And certainly, maintaining good relationships and building relationships over time is important, but the core of it is to continue to invest in great companies. And the more people can hear about those companies and the better your returns are, I think the rest will follow. But spending time and energy on that sort of LP side, I think, is important, because
Mhm.
otherwise no one will know. And the brand building side, no one will know about the great work you're doing with portfolio companies.
For sure. I wonder, when it comes to building relationships with LPs, I feel like it's kind of similar to any type of relationship. You have to build it when you don't need it.
Yeah.
So I wonder if there's any advice on like how to, establish these relationships early on. And I feel like for people who are younger, they may not really have. I feel like LPs are not as like public as most VCs are. I wonder, how would you advise people, if they're like younger listening to this, they wanted to kind of like start early, to build these relationships. How would you kind of like approach the relationship building component to this
Yeah,
company?
I mean, I think we're fortunate now because there have been so many first-time managers that there are a host of resources around it, and
Mhm.
also conferences that you can
Mhm.
go to that LPs do attend, and
Mhm.
other VCs attend as well, and that helps with building your network in two different directions.
Mhm.
And so one conference that I have always wanted to go to but haven't gone to, and now that I have a new fund, will hopefully be going to, is the Raise conference.
Mhm.
That's put on by a great group of VCs who want to uh, support emerging managers. And what I've
Mhm.
learned is that there are fund of funds that are focused on emerging managers.
Mhm.
And um, so there are conferences, there are fund of funds, there's events you can attend. You know, uh, I think we're seeing sort of this resurgence of early managers who and fund of funds. There's an extra resurgence of fund of funds. I think there was a sort of a dip over the last sort of 5 to 10 years in fund of funds, and this sort of emergence of fund of funds that are focusing on emerging managers and diverse managers is really a great development.
Mm. I wonder, when it comes to, having a team of people that like you work with. You have mentioned like, there's a person that you have worked with, who you already worked with in Founders Fund, and then there is this other person who were at like SB Angel. And when it comes to like picking a team, is there some like, I guess, like what's your thought process around like, what is your core unfair advantage versus your partners unfair advantage? How do you come together as a group to tackle this whole, you know, f- uh, uh, managing both like from founder side of things to like the LP racing side of things?
Well, as a emerging manager, you have to do everything. So, then everyone has to do everything. I saw this. I was at Fund 1, 2, and 3 of Founders Fund, sort of 1, 2, and 3 of um, 137 Ventures, And at Initialized, I wasn't at Fund 1 and 2. They were part-time funds, but Fund 3 was our first institutional fund. And so I've had to see that everyone has to do all the jobs, right? Everyone has to do sourcing, everyone has to do networking, everyone has to do fundraising, everyone has to do paperwork and closing deals, and you have to do it all. And that's the fun part of it, right? Like that's why seed and pre-seed investing is interesting, because you can really see how the founders work at a company, because they have to wear many hats. And so certainly I wanted to pick partners who I thought were complementary to me in their thought processes and their networks, in how they approached investing. So, Michael's more of a builder. Robert has, the most amazing network I've ever seen. And I think they're highly complementary to me in many ways. But the truth is, you have to do everything.
Mhm. When it comes to, I guess, like, what do you think, it's like the core skill of succeeding in venture? So I mean, like, based on like the amount of people I've chatted with, I feel like a common theme people are saying it's like the sales skill or like storytelling skill to a degree, about like, I feel like, well, technically in every industry, any type of job, it's a sales job, no matter if you're a founder or VC or something. But I wonder, what do you identify as a skill that you are personally constantly trying to get better at? You feel like it's crucial to succeed in venture?
What skill am I constantly trying to hone and succeed at? Well, I think am becoming more and more introverted, and especially
Mhm.
during COVID. And so for me, I want to sort of spend time overcoming that um, potentially introverted side of myself. I think this might relate to a little bit what you said about being a salesperson. Um, I definitely have to work at that.
Mhm.
And, talking to strangers, I definitely have this feeling of when I'm going to an event or entering a room of apprehension about sort of networking. And that is obviously a very important facet of
Mhm.
what we do as VCs. And it's helpful to the business and our business in so many ways.
Mhm.
I can't tell you how many friends I've made in venture where, I can get I can share deal flow with them and can send them companies that are breaking out if they're sort of later stage. And so that aspect of it, and I, sort of talked about these three different stakeholders with founders, LPs, and VCs. All of that work requires spending time and energy building those networks and being sincere about it, right? Being not just transactional about your work. I think it's important, and this is something that I value, is to really try to build a true connection,
Mhm.
and not just sort of one where you're, checking a box or trying to add a LinkedIn contact. And so, yeah, I think that I would agree with what a lot of your um, other podcast participants have said in terms of that aspect being one that requires constant work at.
I wonder, like, when it comes to brand building for a fund, I guess, like, what are some keywords that you would want people to remember, Hawktail VC is?
That's a great question. I think we are I think our superpower is that network. And, we provide founders with access to the network and try to be really value add at key points in time. Um, one thing that I think about myself and that I like, I feel proud when people feel that like I actually, care about them. I care about their company. So that's something that I feel as far as myself as personally,
Mhm.
uh, something that makes this like a business that is about relationships and not transactional. I think Hawktail is really trying to be forward thinking about sectors and not be afraid of sectors and really follow where our founders take us. And so it would be great if we could be thought of as, value add and uh, sort of more forward thinking and visionary in terms of not being afraid to go places that might be a little bit scary or might have, some components that we're not familiar with investing in.
Mm. When it comes to, you mentioned like network is a really big component. I would argue, I feel like a lot of VCs are, they are at least like on paper known to be like network driven and especially these like multi-stage funds. And I wonder when it comes to like building a brand around the network piece, you mentioned like, being a key, helping them at like a key point of time. So basically helping them maybe I assuming recruit like top key talent on the team or like, helping them through like really tough times. I think one of the factor that LPs like from my some of like my chats with like LP friends or like people that I've known that are LPs, um I feel like one of the things that they're looking at is like, are you the first call the founders are trying to call? And then like I guess like in terms of managing the portfolio companies, what are some system that you use in place to kind of like help them? And do you like are you the person who will be like calling them every month to check in with them, or like are you the more having like more chill approach, which is like waiting for people to send like the portfolio updates and or like, are you one of the VCs who will just text the founder, "How are you doing?" or something? I guess like how would you create like a system around helping portfolio companies?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, we're not building at Hawktail sort of this platform fund model
Mhm,
that Initialized had. And Initialized is doing monthly office hours with the
mhm,
companies. They are the investor of record. They do a fantastic job of that. And with a smaller fund that I would solidly put in the emerging manager category, it's hard to have those resources around it, and frankly, not sort of the vision for what we're building.
mhm,
But that being said, I am sort of on a text message relationship basis with um, all of my founders. I would love and strive to be value add from an advice perspective and from an introductions perspective, but with a smaller fund, I think that we will leave sort of the investor of record work, which is very, very valuable work, to other larger firms.
mm. I wonder, like, since like I feel like one day, I definitely see like Hawktail expand into like more franchises and like maybe down the line you're building a team of not just three people but having a lot of more people joining the team. I guess if there's any like scaling things that you would do to like kind of scale the team down the line. Yeah.
Well, I think that having seen what it takes to sort of build a large firm with operational services,
Mhm,
um, I don't know that that's sort of the model that we're going to pursue. And I think that certainly we'll add, some back office functions, and but really, I think the goal is to strive to continue to be lean. Maybe there could be some junior support investors, but I think the goal is to strive to be lean and have sort of the relationship be kept at sort of the um, VC and founder level,
mhm,
and uh, provide sort of advice and key instructions in that way.
mm. Why do you feel like you don't aspire to be like one of these like um I guess like uh mega funds?
Yeah, I've seen larger funds, and I think there's a lot of reasons. I think it's harder to return capital and generate sort of outsized returns for the risk that we're taking with very large fund sizes.
Mhm,
Um, and I also think that a lot of time is spent managing sort of internal team members. when you have a much larger team. And I would prefer to spend my time sort of looking for great companies and working with founders,
Mm.
rather than sort of the firm building part of it.
Mhm.
And that's sort of where I think adds the most value to the founders, and also adds the most like where I enjoy spending my time as well, Grace. So, there's a couple reasons that I'm glad these larger funds exist, and I'm glad that they have resources for founders. Um, but it's not necessarily our vision for Hawktail.
Awesome. It's great to hear. I feel like it's definitely I feel like I've seen it as a more popular approach as people prefer to be more direct, like working with founders as well as like being able to having just like a lot of like autonomy to like do things. Okay, so let's start. Let's end with like a 1 minute quick fire round. My first question is like, what's your favorite book?
My favorite book. Well, a long time ago, I started a children's book company. So my favorite book, it's like a digital reader for children's book, was The Phantom Toll Booth. I have always been more of a verbal SAT person. And so the Phantom Toll Booth is about a child's adventures in this fantasy world, but they all revolve around characters that have sort of wordplay or um, clever, uh, clever word use. And so I really enjoyed that book, and I read it to my kids.
Oh my god, I'm totally gonna purchase it and then like read it to my boy. But anyway, so that's crazy. That's like well, yeah, that's like a really unique book. Okay, so who made the biggest impact in your career?
I mean, I would have to say maybe Peter Thiel, right? I mean, he allowed me to sort of come in, learn about venture, and without him allowing me to come in and work across Founders Fund and Clarium in the legal capacity, I wouldn't have decided that venture was the right role for me. Or maybe Bruce Gibney, who was actually the one who brought me into the empire.
Amazing. Who made the biggest well, who would you invite to your dinner party?
Who would I invite to a dinner party? Any person?
In person.
Oh gosh, it's very, very open question. Who am I interested in meeting these days? Um, I don't know. There's so many people that I would find interesting and entertaining. Like I would be interested to like talk to Tony Fauci. I'd be interested to talk to Tom Brady. There's a lot of people that I would love to sit next to at a dinner party.
Amazing. Where can we find you outside of work?
You can find me at kids' soccer games. I spend a lot of time at my kids' soccer games, driving them around.
Oh my god, that's amazing. Well, Alda, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Grace. It was a lot of fun.
Let me quickly end stream.